My name is Marissa Grant, and I am 34 years old. I still remember how every sound in that glass-walled conference room seemed magnified the day Trevor Dalton turned his gaze on me. 25 of my colleagues were crammed around the long mahogany table, sipping burnt coffee and pretending to care about the quarterly numbers. Trevor, our polished, silver-tongued marketing director, had just finished describing the disappointing client retention statistics when he decided it was time to find a scapegoat. He clasped his hands and looked right at me. "Everyone here adds value to this company," he began, his voice syrupy with false encouragement. Then he smiled a little, the way people smile before they say something cruel. "Everyone except the weakest link in our marketing team." A few people actually laughed. I felt my chest tighten, but I kept my face perfectly neutral. I wasn't going to cry. Not here. Not after 5 years of coming in before sunrise and staying until security made their final rounds. The laughter grew, a nervous tittering that scraped against my skin like sandpaper. I watched as Trevor turned back to the slides, as if nothing had happened. The numbers blurred, but I refused to blink. If I blinked, tears would fall, and I would never give him that satisfaction. As I sat there, still and silent, 1,000 memories swarmed my mind. My first day at Northbridge Creative Solutions, a mid-sized marketing agency in downtown Chicago. Fresh from graduate school, my head full of ambition and ideas. Back then, Trevor had seemed impressive, even inspiring. He wore bespoke suits, quoted management books with the confidence of someone who actually believed them, and had a reputation for winning over difficult clients. During my interview, he leaned forward with a smile and told me, "We're building something special here, but you have to understand, success demands sacrifice." I believed him. I believed every word. For the first 2 years, I accepted every extra project. I worked weekends. I wrote strategy decks he would deliver as if they were his own. I designed entire campaign concepts he would later present to the board without mentioning me once. When I gently asked about credit, he would pat my shoulder and say, "Your time will come, Marissa. This is how careers are built." I tried to convince myself it was normal, that paying my dues meant being invisible, but the years blurred by, and my so-called time never arrived. I thought of the Larkspur Electronics pitch, the one that should have changed everything. For months, Trevor complained about how impossible it was to get their chief marketing officer to agree to a meeting. One evening, after he'd left in a huff, I stayed late and researched everything I could about Larkspur. That was when I discovered their CMO, Christine Adler, volunteered at a literacy nonprofit 3 blocks from our office. The next week, I signed up to help sort donated books. We worked side by side for hours. We talked about education and the importance of community, and when the subject of work came up, she was surprised I was with Northbridge. "Your firm has been persistent," she said, and I remember the way she raised an eyebrow. "Your director, Dalton, he's confident." "Confidence has its place," I told her, "but I prefer to listen before I pitch." 2 days later, Larkspur requested a meeting. They specifically asked that I attend. When I told Trevor, he clapped his hands together with theatrical delight. "I knew persistence would pay off," he said, already mentally counting the commission. "I'll handle the presentation. You can take notes." That meeting was the first time I realized Trevor wasn't just taking credit. He was actively erasing me. Christine directed nearly all her questions to me, and I answered every one, but Trevor insisted he remain listed as the primary contact. "It makes sense hierarchically," he insisted. "You understand, don't you?" I understood more than he could ever know. That day, I started documenting everything. Every email, every message, every acknowledgement from clients. I built a file so detailed, so precise, that no one would be able to pretend I didn't exist. But back in that conference room, the moment still felt surreal. Trevor kept talking as if he hadn't publicly gutted me. My coworkers were shifting in their seats, staring at their hands, desperate not to meet my eyes. The projection screen displayed figures I had personally assembled, but no one would know that. I wondered if this was how it would always be. Me, sitting silent while someone else took the credit and wielded the power. No. That word rang clear in my mind. A single, resolute answer. No more. I sat straighter in my chair and smoothed my skirt, steadying my breathing. Because if Trevor thought I would crumble, he was about to learn how wrong he was. Before I continue, I want you to think of a time you were made to feel small in front of others. When someone else claimed your work as their own. Maybe it was subtle, a passing remark that diminished you. Or maybe it was public, a deliberate act of humiliation. I'm sharing this because what happened next wasn't just about me. It was about everyone who has ever been underestimated. As Trevor droned on about projected quarterly growth, I shifted my attention to my bag resting against the chair leg. Inside was the blue folder I'd spent the last year assembling. Evidence of who really made this company's clients happy. Proof that the so-called weakest link had been the backbone all along. I still hadn't decided exactly when I would use it, but sitting there, feeling the heat of 25 pairs of eyes flicking between Trevor and me, I realized that moment had arrived. I was done waiting. The meeting dragged on for another 20 minutes, but I couldn't tell you what Trevor said. His voice had faded to background noise, like the distant hum of traffic outside the windows. My heartbeat was the only thing I could hear clearly. When he finally wrapped up his presentation, people clapped half-heartedly, the sound as hollow as the praise Trevor so often showered on himself. When the room began to empty, I stayed seated. I didn't want to face the pitying glances or the forced small talk. I needed a moment to steady the trembling in my hands. In front of me, the blue folder sat in my lap, heavier than it looked. It was strange, knowing I had the power to change everything tucked between those glossy covers. I thought back to the countless times Trevor had proven exactly who he was. My mind kept circling back to the Larkspur Electronics deal because that was when the truth had crystallized for me. He hadn't just taken credit. He had decided that I would always be an accessory to his success. Never a partner, never a threat. After that, I started to see the pattern in sharp relief. Every win Trevor celebrated had someone else's fingerprints all over it, like the Indigo retail campaign Ravi Shah developed, with messaging so fresh it landed us on a shortlist for an industry award. Trevor accepted that plaque with a gracious speech, never mentioning Ravi's name. Or the crisis management plan Leah Kim crafted when a client's social media meltdown threatened to cost us a six-figure contract. Trevor presented it to the client as though he'd written it himself. But the moment that pushed me over the edge wasn't even about me. It was about Daniel Brooks, our junior strategist. Daniel had spent 6 weeks perfecting a data-driven approach to client segmentation. He was so proud when he shared it with Trevor. I'd never forget the look on Daniel's face when Trevor unveiled it at a leadership meeting, calling it my personal innovation. Afterward, Daniel just sat at his desk, staring at nothing. That was when I decided I wouldn't let this happen to me, or to anyone else, anymore. I started saving everything. Every email where a client thanked me personally. Every text asking for my input late at night. Every note where a client said, "I trust your judgment, Marissa." By the end, the folder was nearly an inch thick, organized in color-coded tabs. My entire secret life, my real career, documented in black and white. But that folder wasn't the only thing I built. I also started creating direct relationships. It wasn't difficult. The clients were eager to know who actually did the work. I explained, with a polite smile, that I was always available if they needed anything, no matter the hour. They started calling me with questions, requests, emergencies. I responded quickly, and they came to rely on me. Soon, it was clear. Trevor was nothing without the people he overshadowed. I remember one evening when Christine Adler from Larkspur called me at home. She was debating whether to expand her marketing budget and needed advice. We talked for nearly an hour. Before hanging up, she said, "I appreciate that you're the one who actually listens, Marissa." That one sentence validated every late night I'd spent agonizing over whether my work mattered. In the office, I still played the part of the agreeable team player. Trevor didn't suspect a thing. Why would he? He was convinced no one would ever challenge him. To him, I was just another faceless subordinate who should be grateful to stand in his shadow. But outside the office, my quiet network grew stronger. 17 of our 20 biggest accounts had my cell phone saved in their contacts. 12 had explicitly told me they stayed with Northbridge because they trusted me, not Trevor. And yet, despite everything, I stayed. I kept showing up each morning. I kept completing the decks, solving the problems, cleaning up Trevor's mistakes. I told myself I needed the steady paycheck, the health insurance, the professional references, all the same excuses we all made, until the day Trevor humiliated me in front of the entire department. As I replayed his words in my mind, the weakest link, I felt a new clarity settle in my chest. I realized I had been waiting for permission that would never come. Waiting for Trevor to acknowledge me, to reward me, to see me as an equal. It was never going to happen. I glanced up and saw Elaine Foster, our CEO, standing in the doorway to the conference room. Her expression was unreadable as she scanned the nearly empty space. Our eyes met for an instant before she looked away. Elaine had always been cordial, if distant. She trusted Trevor's reports, never questioning who actually did the work. But now, as she studied me, I wondered if she was starting to suspect the truth. I rose slowly, gathering my folder and my composure. I walked out of the conference room, past the hushed voices and sidelong glances. My legs felt like lead, but my resolve was a current running under my skin. When I reached my desk, I placed the folder in my bag and turned to shut down my computer. That's when Daniel appeared beside me, his eyes wide. "Marissa," he whispered, glancing over his shoulder to make sure no one was listening. "What are you going to do?" I zipped my bag closed and looked him in the eye. "I'm going to stop letting other people decide what I'm worth." He nodded slowly, something like hope flickering across his face. "If you need anything, just say the word." "Thank you," I told him, and meant it. Because in that moment I understood that this wasn't just about my career. It was about all of us, the quiet contributors, the invisible engines behind other people's success. I took a last look around the open floor, at the rows of desks, the motivational posters, the glass walls designed to look transparent while concealing everything that mattered. I knew I wouldn't miss this place. Not like this. Then I slipped my bag over my shoulder and walked toward the elevators. As the doors closed behind me, I felt something inside me unlock. I wasn't sure what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I was done being the quiet one. The elevator descended with a hushed whisper, each floor number blinking past as I steadied my breathing. I told myself I should feel triumphant, finally stepping out of the shadows I'd been forced into. But in truth, I felt something colder, something I hadn't named yet. When I reached the lobby, the security guard nodded at me out of habit. I walked past the reception desk, out into the early afternoon glare. For a moment, I considered going straight home and never returning. Let them figure out, in slow, dawning horror, how much of their business relied on the woman they'd called the weakest link. But as I stepped onto the sidewalk, my phone buzzed. A single name lit up the screen. Elaine Foster. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. but something made me swipe to answer. "Marissa," she said immediately, her voice tight with urgency. "Please don't leave. I need to speak with you." I stared across the street at the parking garage where my car waited. "I'm not sure there's anything left to say, Elaine." "There is," she insisted. "Please, come up to my office." A part of me wanted to hang up, to make a clean break, but another part, the part that still believed in consequences, knew this was the only way the truth would be heard. 30 minutes, I said quietly. "No more." "Agreed." I ended the call and turned back toward the building I'd just left. The glass doors reflected the city behind me and my own reflection. My chin lifted higher than I'd ever seen it. 30 minutes. That was all she would get. Elaine's office sat on the 24th floor, tucked into the southwest corner with sweeping views of the river and the skyline. I'd only been here twice. Once when I'd signed my contract, and once for my 3-year service award, where Trevor had taken credit for mentoring me. Now, the door was already open. Elaine stood near the windows, her posture tense. As I stepped inside, she turned, holding the blue folder in both hands. "I've spent the last 20 minutes reading this," she began, without preamble. "Did you compile all of it yourself?" "Yes," I said, my voice steady. She exhaled slowly. "This is extensive." "It's the truth," I corrected. Elaine gestured to one of the visitor chairs, and we both sat. For a long moment, she simply looked at me, not past me, not around me, the way executives often did, but directly into my face, as if seeing me for the first time. "I want you to understand something," she said finally. "I didn't know any of this. About Trevor. About how many of these accounts were actually maintained by you." "With respect," I replied evenly. "You didn't want to know." She blinked, as if struck. "That's fair." Another silence opened between us. "I'm not here to apologize," Elaine said. "Not yet. Apologies are easy. Fixing this is not." "Then why did you call me back?" She tapped her finger against the folder. "Because if you walk out that door and take this documentation to another agency, or worse, to the press, Northbridge will lose the majority of our recurring revenue in under a year." I didn't pretend to be surprised. "Yes?" Her jaw flexed and she nodded once as though acknowledging a painful truth. "I don't want to lose you, Marissa. I'd rather find a way forward." I watched her carefully. A way forward for who? Me? The company? Or Trevor? "For all of us," she said, but her tone had shifted, more cautious now, as though she realized I wasn't going to be placated by polished promises. I leaned back in my chair. For the first time in my career, I was in a position to negotiate from strength. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. "What do you want?" Elaine asked quietly. "Be specific." I took a breath. I hadn't planned this moment in detail. In my mind, I'd always imagined leaving, not staying. But the words came without hesitation. "I want transparency," I began, "a system where credit is assigned based on actual contribution, not title. I want a clear, documented structure for client management that rewards retention and satisfaction." Elaine nodded slowly, absorbing each point. "I want recognition for the work I've already done," I continued, "not just for myself, but for Ravi, for Leah, for Daniel. All of us who've been building this agency while others took the credit." "And Trevor?" she asked, her expression neutral. "That depends," I said honestly. "If he can adapt to a model based on accountability rather than perception, he can stay. If he can't, he shouldn't be here." Elaine studied me for a long moment. "That's ambitious." "So is running a company," I replied. Her lips twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Fair enough." She set the folder down carefully. "Next week, the board is meeting to review quarterly performance. I'd like you to present this restructuring proposal formally. I almost laughed. Present it? You think they'll take me seriously after Trevor just called me a failure in front of the entire department? Elaine lifted her chin. They will if I endorse you, and if you bring this. She tapped the folder again. I swallowed, the reality of what she was asking settling in my chest. This wasn't a job anymore. It was a battle for the future of the agency. I need time to prepare, I said finally. You'll have it, she assured me. I stood, my heart beating fast. No announcements, I added. Not yet. No rumors, no retaliations. Elaine inclined her head. Agreed. As I reached the doorway, she called my name. Marissa? I turned. Thank you, she said simply, for not just walking away. I nodded once and stepped into the hall. The next day, I came back to the office as if nothing had happened. My colleagues stared openly, waiting for an explanation. Trevor avoided eye contact, his posture stiff whenever we passed each other. No one knew yet, but everything had already changed. Returning to work felt surreal. I had spent so long shrinking myself to fit the role Trevor and the rest of the leadership expected. Now, every step across the polished concrete floors felt like a quiet rebellion. People watched me with open curiosity. A few colleagues offered tentative nods of encouragement. Most just averted their eyes. No one dared to ask what had happened behind the glass walls of Elaine Foster's office. For 3 days, I maintained my normal routine. I responded to client emails, updated project timelines, and pretended to ignore the whispers. But inside, something was shifting, like tectonic plates grinding into a new shape. Late that Wednesday, I stayed after hours to work on my proposal. The office was nearly empty, save for the cleaning crew moving quietly between cubicles. I sat in the glow of my monitor, crafting slide after slide. I started with the evidence, the documented gaps between our client retention figures and the official account assignments. I included case studies showing how transparency in client relationship management improved satisfaction and profitability. I even pulled data from other industries, legal firms, consultancies, software companies, where similar restructuring had delivered measurable results. But the most important part wasn't the numbers. It was the stories. I compiled statements from clients, the ones who trusted me to solve problems Trevor never bothered to understand. The ones who said plainly that they stayed with Northbridge because of my work, my responsiveness, my commitment. Each testimonial was proof that the old hierarchy wasn't just unfair, it was unsustainable. The next morning, I came in early. My heart skipped when I saw a familiar figure standing by my desk. Ravi Shah, our creative lead, held a paper cup of coffee in each hand. "Thought you might need this," he said softly, offering me one. "Thanks." I accepted it, touched by the gesture. He glanced around to be sure no one was listening. "I don't know exactly what you're planning," he said, "but if you're fighting for transparency, you have my support. You always have." Something loosened in my chest. "That means a lot," I told him. He gave a small smile. "We've all been waiting for someone to do what you're doing." As he walked away, I realized how many people had been enduring the same quiet indignities. How many had resigned themselves to never being seen, and how many would stand behind me when the time came. I spent the following evenings refining my proposal. I rehearsed until my throat was raw. I practiced answering every question I could imagine. What will this cost? Will clients tolerate the disruption? What if Trevor refuses to cooperate? Each answer brought me closer to something I hadn't felt in years: certainty. 2 days before the board meeting, I made the most difficult set of calls in my professional life. One by one, I reached out to our top 15 clients. I didn't share every detail, just enough for them to understand that change was coming. that the way we served them would soon reflect the reality they already experienced, that their business was built on authentic relationships, not titles on an org chart. To my relief, every single client said the same thing. We trust you. Some said it warmly, others more matter of fact. But the message was consistent. Whatever happened next, I would not be facing it alone. On the eve of the board meeting, I sat at my kitchen table, my laptop open, the final version of my presentation ready. My phone buzzed. Elaine Foster. I hesitated, then answered. "Are you prepared?" she asked without preamble. "Yes," I said simply. There was a pause on the line. "Trevor has requested to present his own perspective," Elaine said. "I've approved it." My stomach clenched. "Of course you have. This isn't a contest," she said gently. "The board needs to hear both sides." "Except that's exactly what it is," I murmured, too quietly for her to hear. Another silence. "One more thing," she continued. "I haven't shared your client documentation yet. I thought it would be most powerful coming from you." I closed my eyes. "Understood." "Marissa," she said, her tone softer. "Whatever happens tomorrow, you've already changed this place." I swallowed. "Thank you." After we hung up, I looked out my window at the city lights. For the first time in years, I felt ready. The next morning, I arrived at the office before sunrise. My reflection in the glass doors looked different. Older, maybe. Stronger. The boardroom on the 24th floor was already set up when I walked in. A polished table gleamed under the recessed lighting. 10 chairs were occupied, 8 board members, Elaine, and Northbridge's legal counsel. Trevor stood at the far end, reviewing notes. He looked up when I entered. His eyes flickered across my face, searching for a weakness. I gave him nothing. Elaine cleared her throat. "We're ready to begin." I connected my laptop to the projection system and took a breath. "For the past 5 years," I began, "I've watched this company underestimate the value of authentic client relationships." As I spoke, I felt my voice growing steadier. I described how the disconnect between titles and actual responsibilities created confusion, resentment, and risk. I presented the data. I shared the client testimonials. I laid bare every hidden truth. When I finished, I looked around the table. No one spoke. Then Elaine gestured to Trevor. "Mr. Dalton?" Trevor stood, smoothing his tie. "Marissa raises important points," he began, adopting the calm, reasonable tone he reserved for board presentations. "However, her analysis fails to consider the bigger picture." He clicked to his first slide, a chart showing new client acquisitions over the past 3 years. "My role has always been vision and growth," he continued smoothly. "While Marissa's contributions are valuable, they are only part of the equation." He went on, reframing my evidence as support work, painting himself as the architect behind Northbridge's success. I watched the board members nod thoughtfully. Part of me wanted to scream. But I stayed silent, knowing the truth was in their hands now. When Trevor finished, Elaine folded her hands. "Thank you both," she said evenly. "The board will deliberate. Please wait outside." Trevor and I walked out in silence. We stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath us. After a moment, he spoke without looking at me. "Nothing personal," he murmured. "This is just business." I turned to face him fully. "No," I said quietly. "It's always personal. That's why you never understood what matters." He said nothing more. The board deliberated for nearly 40 minutes. Time stretched out in the hallway as Trevor and I waited in tense silence. Every so often, I caught a glimpse of his reflection in the glass, his jaw working as he ground his teeth. I wondered if this was the first time he'd ever been forced to defend his version of reality instead of simply imposing it. My phone buzzed twice with texts from Ravi and Leah. "You've got this. Whatever happens, we're behind you." I closed my eyes and breathed in slowly. I reminded myself that no matter what verdict came through that door, I had already proven the truth. To myself, to my colleagues, to our clients. That would have to be enough. At last, the door opened. Elaine stepped into the hall, her expression unreadable. "The board is ready," she said simply. Trevor and I followed her inside. The air in the boardroom felt charged, like a storm about to break. Chairman Lewis Hartley, a man in his 60s with a clipped British accent and an aversion to small talk, folded his hands in front of him. "Ms. Grant," he began, "your documentation and proposal have illuminated significant blind spots in our client management approach. The board acknowledges that these issues demand correction." Trevor shifted beside me, his shoulders tightening. "Mr. Dalton," Hartley continued, "your points regarding acquisition and strategic growth also have merit. However," he paused, glancing down at a sheaf of papers before returning his gaze to me. "They do not negate the evidence that Northbridge's revenue depends, to an overwhelming degree, on the personal relationships maintained by Ms. Grant." Trevor said nothing, but I could sense the fury radiating off him. Elaine picked up where Hartley left off. "Therefore, effective immediately, the board has approved a restructuring of our client engagement model. We will create a new department, Client Relationship Strategy, under Ms. Grant's leadership." My breath caught. Even though I had prepared for this possibility, hearing it spoken aloud was different. Trevor looked down, his knuckles white where he gripped the edge of the table. "This department will oversee all ongoing client management," Elaine continued. "Account responsibilities will be attributed based on documented contributions, not prior titles. Compensation structures will be revised accordingly." She turned her gaze to Trevor. "Mr. Dalton, your experience in business development remains valuable. You will transition to a new role focusing exclusively on acquiring new clients. All accounts you currently manage will be transferred to the Client Relationship Strategy team." A silence fell over the room. It wasn't quite a termination, but it was a demotion in every way that mattered. Hartley cleared his throat. "Ms. Grant, are you prepared to accept this position?" I straightened my spine. "Yes, sir." "Excellent," he said crisply. "You will work with Ms. Foster over the next 30 days to implement the restructuring. We expect full cooperation from all involved." Trevor swallowed, still not looking up. Elaine closed her folder. "Thank you both. This meeting is adjourned." The hallway outside the boardroom felt brighter than it had when we first walked in. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. Trevor stepped past me without a word, his footsteps clipped and rigid. For the first time, he looked small. Not powerful or intimidating, just another man who built his career on illusions. Elaine touched my shoulder lightly. "Congratulations," she said quietly. "You earned this." "I know," I replied, my voice steady. That afternoon, the entire staff was summoned to the main conference room. The air was thick with curiosity and dread. Emergency company meetings almost never meant good news. Elaine stood at the front, her expression calm but serious. "Today marks the beginning of a new chapter for Northbridge," she began. "One based on transparency, accountability, and respect for the people whose work sustains this organization." As she spoke, she introduced the new Client Relationship Strategy Department. When she announced my name as its director, there was a collective murmur. Some surprised, some approving, some skeptical. I stepped forward. My heart thundered as I looked out across the faces of people who had shared long nights, tight deadlines, and silent frustrations. "Effective immediately," Elaine continued, "all account assignments will be reviewed to determine who is actually maintaining each client relationship, Titles and compensation will be adjusted accordingly. In the crowd, I spotted Ravi, Leah, and Daniel. Their expressions were stunned but hopeful. For the first time, I saw possibility in their eyes instead of resignation. Elaine paused. This restructuring is not a rebuke of past leadership, it is an evolution. But we all knew what it really was: a reckoning. When the meeting ended, people began to cluster around me, some offering cautious congratulations, others with guarded questions. Daniel was the first to reach me. "You did it," he whispered. I nodded, a weight lifting from my chest. We did it. The first week was chaos. Senior managers whose authority had never been questioned were suddenly being asked to document their contributions. Some were furious. One threatened to resign on the spot. Another tried to undermine the process by quietly spreading rumors that I'd manipulated the board. But the data didn't lie. Client after client confirmed who they actually trusted. My colleagues, so long dismissed as background support, were named again and again as the reason clients renewed their contracts. Every time someone tried to discredit me, the truth stood in my place. One morning, Leah knocked on my new office door. She stepped inside, her expression a mix of relief and disbelief. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, "for all of this." "You don't need to," I replied. "Just help me make it work." She nodded, her voice steady. "I will." And in that moment I understood. This wasn't the end of the fight. It was the beginning of something better. The weeks that followed were the most demanding of my career. Every morning I arrived before dawn, reviewing account files and meeting with teams who had never been given a voice. Every evening I left after dark, my mind spinning with spreadsheets and client notes. It was exhausting, but for the first time the exhaustion felt purposeful. I wasn't just proving something to the board or to Trevor. I was proving it to myself, and to every quiet contributor who had ever been overlooked. By the second week, the initial shock was wearing off. People were beginning to understand that this was not a temporary upheaval. This was the new standard. Some managers dug in their heels, refusing to acknowledge that their titles no longer shielded them from accountability. One threatened legal action, claiming the reassignments were defamatory. Elaine handled him with measured calm. "We're not interested in perception," she told him. "We're interested in the documented reality of who does the work." He resigned 2 days later. In contrast, others began to thrive. Leah, once relegated to quietly running crisis communications behind the scenes, stepped into her new leadership role with steady confidence. Ravi found fresh purpose as the head of creative strategy, finally empowered to credit the team members who made his work possible. Even Daniel, who had almost quit the year before, became a trusted voice in strategy meetings. Watching them come into their own was more rewarding than any personal accolade. The most surprising transformation belonged to Trevor. For weeks, he struggled in his new business development role. Without a team to prepare his materials, he was forced to confront how much of his success had relied on the people he dismissed. One afternoon, he appeared in my doorway. He looked tired, the familiar arrogance gone from his posture. "Do you have a minute?" he asked quietly. I gestured to the chair across from my desk, the same desk he once occupied. He sank into it with a heavy sigh. "This isn't working," he admitted. "I thought I could handle it alone, but I can't." I watched him, waiting. "I need support," he said finally. "I need the team." There was something disorienting about hearing Trevor Dalton, once the self-appointed king of Northbridge, confess that he couldn't do it without the very people he had overlooked. "You were always part of the team," I said evenly. "You just didn't act like it." He didn't argue. After a pause, I continued. "We'll involve you in creative briefs and analytics meetings, but everyone's contributions will be transparent. No more taking credit." He nodded, the fight gone from his expression. "Understood." And for the first time, I believed he meant it. The real test came at the 90-day board review. Elaine and I presented the early results of the restructuring. Client retention had risen by 18%, employee turnover had dropped to its lowest rate in 7 years. Several accounts that were at risk of leaving had signed new contracts after hearing about the changes. When I finished, Chairman Hartley regarded me with a thoughtful expression. "It appears transparency is good for business," he remarked dryly. "It's good for people?" I corrected. "That's why it works." After the meeting, Elaine pulled me aside. "The board is impressed," she said simply. "And so am I." I felt the smallest flicker of disbelief, how quickly everything had shifted. "When you walked out of that conference room, I don't think you realized you were about to transform this entire organization," she added. I shook my head. All I wanted was to be seen. "Sometimes," she said, "that's where real change starts." The next month brought more milestones. A long-discussed West Coast office finally opened, and I was asked to oversee the client transition process. Late one evening, after my final call of the day, Elaine appeared in my doorway again. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "The board has approved the creation of a new position," she began. "Chief Client Officer? A seat on the executive leadership team, policy-making authority, oversight of all client engagement and retention strategies." I felt my breath catch. "We'd like you to take it," she finished. For a moment I couldn't speak. "Elaine," I said finally, "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll consider it," she replied, "and that you understand you've earned every bit of this." I nodded slowly. "I'll review the details," I promised. She smiled, an expression rare enough on her face that it felt momentous. "Good." That night, I walked to the train station instead of taking a car, needing the cold air to clear my thoughts. 6 months earlier, I was the woman everyone overlooked, the one they expected to stay silent, to accept the scraps of recognition doled out by people who hadn't earned them. Now I was being invited to shape the future of the company. It wasn't the triumph I'd once imagined. It was something quieter, more enduring, a sense of finally standing in the light on my own terms. 3 weeks later, I stood at the front of the largest conference room, facing an audience of employees old and new. "Thank you all for being here," I began, my voice steady. "Today marks the beginning of our next chapter. One where transparency isn't an aspiration, it's the foundation." As I continued, I glanced across the crowd. Ravi, Leah, and Daniel stood near the front, listening intently. Trevor was there too, flanked by the new business development team. He wasn't smiling exactly, but he looked for once like a man prepared to earn his place. When I finished, the applause that filled the room didn't feel perfunctory. It felt genuine. Later that evening, as the last stragglers left, Trevor approached me. "That was a good speech," he said, his voice gruff. "Thank you." He hesitated. "I wanted to say, I was wrong about you." It wasn't an apology, but it was the closest he would ever come. I nodded. "I know." Standing alone in the empty conference room, I let out a long breath. The greatest revenge was never proving Trevor wrong. It was building something so strong, so self-evident, that no one could ever question my worth again. And then, inviting even the doubters to be part of it, on fair terms. Because real success isn't just being seen. It's making sure no one else is invisible either.